After the death of his beloved wife Ella, Wilma Castro, the head of a food company, didn't believe he could fall in love again and find happiness. But apparently, it is true when people say that grief lives for 3 years. And besides, Anna, Wilma's mother, often encouraged her son saying, "Dear, your son needs a mother, and you should keep living. I hope that one day you will find a good woman who will become a good wife for you and a good mother for our little Tio. You just need to look around." And then one day, the young widower met Ingrid. And after a week, he realized that she was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Ingrid quickly bonded with his 6-year-old son Tio, which was a strong argument in favor of their relationship. A couple of months later, Wilma proposed to his beloved, and they had a beautiful wedding. Anna was delighted. "Now I'm not afraid to die," said the elderly mother. "You and Tio are in good hands." "What are you talking about, Mum?" snorted the son. "Stop talking nonsense. Ingrid and I haven't given you a granddaughter yet, and you'll certainly dance at Tio's wedding." After their honeymoon in the Seychelles, the newlyweds started their family life, which, according to Wilma, was beautiful. Unfortunately, after a while, Wilma faced a serious problem. Tio started getting sick too often, and his father couldn't understand what was wrong. Ingrid loved the boy very much and created a careful environment for him, but it didn't help. One illness was followed by another, a runny nose, a sore throat, or even bronchitis. "Why don't we send him to a health camp?" Ingrid suggested. "But Tio has never been away from home for so long," Wilma thoughtfully replied. "Well, you know, there's a first time for everything," his wife said. "Yes, but not at 6 years old," the man objected. "It seems a little early for him to be far away from his family alone. I understand your concern, but I disagree. It will be good for Tio anyway. He'll become more independent, and most importantly, he'll get some fresh air and a change of environment and climate." "Have you ever considered that life in the city may not be suited for him?" "No, I hadn't thought about that," Wilma said, shaking his head. "Honey, I'm totally confused. I don't understand anything anymore. Everything was fine with him before, but now he's constantly sick. Wilma, I try my best to prevent him from viruses, but all in vain. I can," Ingrid said, sobbing and wiping tears from her eyes. "I'm watching Tio's diet and regularly airing his room. I don't want to keep him far away from us because I love him, but I can't see his suffering anymore. My heart aches for the poor boy. Wouldn't it make sense to air his room less often? I think it's too chilly in there." "That's not a problem," replied the young wife. "It's worse for him when it's very hot, and fresh air reduces the germs. But you know, I'm not a doctor, and in the camp Tio will be under the care of specialists." "Well, maybe you're right," Wilma said thoughtfully. "Perhaps a health camp is not such a bad idea." "Okay, I'll think about it. Thank you, my dear, for all you do for my son." And the loving father started exploring various options for children's recreation centers. Soon he found something suitable for Tio, and he promptly contacted the camp administration. "We have an individualized approach for each child," said a woman with a pleasant, well-pitched voice. "The minimum length of stay is 2 months." 2 months? Wilma repeated it with a slumped voice. Even though Wilma didn't fully understand the necessity of this trip, he wasn't ready to be apart from his son even for a whole month. "Yes, 2 months, the administrator confirmed. "But don't worry, you can visit your child on any day that is convenient for you." "Well, that's not so bad," Wilma replied. "And how do I sign up?" The administrator explained all the necessary details. And that was it. All that was left was to mentally prepare Tio for the trip. After all, the kid was going to be away from home for 2 months. But to Wilma's surprise, Tio's eyes lit up. "And will I play there with other kids?" the boy asked excitedly, and his father sighed. Yes, he understood pretty well that Tio lacked communication with his peers. He used to go to school, but as soon as a series of colds began, Wilma took his son out. So Ingrid was right. A kids' health camp was a great idea, no matter how you looked at it. However, a week before the departure, the boy complained of a severe headache. Putting his hand on his son's forehead, Wilma shrieked. Tio's forehead was as hot as a stove. The thermometer showed a temperature of almost 40. "Oh God, this is the last thing we need," the father muttered in despair and sank into a chair. "What's wrong?" Ingrid asked as she entered, hearing her husband's last words. "Well, Tio is sick again," Wilma said. and it seems quite serious." The young woman stared intently at her stepson and furrowed her brow. Tio's face turned red, and sweat started to appear on his forehead. "It looks like we'll have to postpone the trip," Wilma said, "and now we are going to the doctor." "Are you sure? We still have a week before we leave." "Maybe he'll get better," Ingrid said. However, the next day, Tio showed no signs of improvement, and the doctor said that the trip was no longer an option, and I would strongly recommend you to get a qualified nurse. "I see, thank you." "Why do we need a nurse?" Ingrid exclaimed as the doctor left. "Why do we need a stranger in the house?" Do you know anything about medicine?" Wilma interrupted her. When it came to his son, Wilma was firm in his principles. "Well, no. But then this conversation is over," he said. "Tonight I will go to the agency's website and find a nurse." Realizing that her husband's decision to hire a nurse for his son was final and could not be challenged, Ingrid did not argue and nodded. "Well, that's fine," Wilma concluded. "Now I need to go to the office. Take care of Tio. If there's an emergency, call me." After completing some urgent tasks at work, Wilma hurried home. He trusted Ingrid as much as he trusted himself, but he felt calmer if Tio was by his side. As he drove over the bridge, he noticed a very young, poorly dressed girl. She seemed lost in thought, and then she swung her leg over the railing with the clear intention of jumping. Wilma slammed on the brakes and quickly got out of the car. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted, pulling the stranger away from the railing. "Are you exhausted from living?" "Yes, tired," sobbed the girl. "This isn't life, but just suffering." "Come on, let's go to the car," Wilma commanded. After a little hesitation, the girl obeyed. "What's your name?" Wilma tried to ask her kindly. "Corey," replied the girl timidly. "Corey, tell me, why does such a young, beautiful girl think that life is suffering?" "I'm pregnant," Corey whispered and silently sobbed. "Wow, congratulations." The businessman shook his head reproachfully. "So you've decided not only to ruin yourself, but also your innocent child?" "My fiancé left me," the girl kept sobbing. "I trusted him, and he did such a cruel thing to me." "I see," Wilma nodded. "But that's still no reason to take your life and the life of your child." "It's easy for you to say," "Yes," she sighed, "but I have no one to turn to and I have nowhere to live." "What about your parents?" As it turned out, Corey's father left the family when she was 2 years old. Her mother raised her alone, and when Corey was 14, her mother met Bob. Bob moved into their house in the village and took care of all the repairs that needed to be done. He seemed to be a hard worker in general, and both the mother and daughter were grateful for his help around the house. The idyllic situation lasted for exactly 3 months, and then Bob started to have bouts of drunkenness that would last for months. "Mom, why don't you kick him out?" Corey asked. "Why do you need him? You wouldn't understand," the mother sighed. "Even though he's bad, he's mine." And then Mom got sick. The 4th stage left no chance of recovery. The woman burned out like a candle in a matter of months. Bob kept living with his stepdaughter. "I'm registered here, so I'm not going anywhere," declared the stepfather. Corey was not glad to live with Bob, who was basically a stranger to her, but she couldn't help it because Bob really was registered with them. After a while, she met Steve. The young couple rented an apartment and began living together. However, the news of Corey's pregnancy did not make her boyfriend happy at all, and the poor girl moved out of the rented apartment. But when she returned to her mother's house, it turned out that the house had burned down. Bob said it happened because of old wiring, but Corey was sure because of his habit of smoking in bed. "I was desperate because I had nowhere to go and no one to ask for help." "There's always a way out," Wilma spoke slowly. "No, I'm not going to have an abortion," Corey said, shaking her head. "My mother told me never to do this because of my Rh-negative blood type. Otherwise, I will never have a baby anymore." "I see," Wilma sighed. He was puzzled. Unlike many businessmen, Wilma Castro had not lost his ability to feel compassion for the people around him, and therefore he wanted very much to help the stranger. But how could he help her? "And what can you do?" Wilma asked. "What do you mean?" frowned Corey. "You think if you have money, you can offer." The girl did not finish her line of thought and looked indignantly at Wilma. The man looked at her perplexed, and when he finally realized what she meant, he laughed. Wait, Corey," Wilma laughed. "Did you think that I wanted to offer you intimacy?" Wilma looked at her and the girl blushed. Okay, I should be more clear. Will you come work for me as a maid? The man asked. Do you need a maid? Well, you could say that, Wilma nodded. I do have a maid, but she doesn't suit me very well. What's wrong with her? Corey inquired. What if I'm not right for you for the same reason? I hope that's not the case, the man smiled. My former maid is, shall we say, overstepping her boundaries, but I'd still like to know what skills you have. Corey was silent for about half a minute, and then she said, I did 4 years of medical school, but I quit as soon as I found out I was pregnant and my boyfriend betrayed me. Oh, Wilma exclaimed, why didn't you take a leave of absence? Well, everything came at once. I just couldn't take it. I see, he said, and then it hit him. What if I hire this girl as a nurse for Tio? 4 completed courses is something, Wilma thought, and explaining the situation, offered Corey a job. Oh no, she was afraid. I'm afraid that I can't handle it. Didn't they teach you anything in medical school? Wilma widened his eyes and added, I can't believe in this. Corey kept refusing, but the natural gift of persuasion possessed by the businessman did its job. When the girl agreed, she felt both joy and shame at the same time. Just minutes ago, she didn't want to live, and now she had found a job and a roof over her head. You never know where you'll find it or where you'll lose it. Ingrid, on the other hand, was furious. She did not take the stranger's appearance in the house easily. Why do you need this homeless woman? Exclaimed Wilma's perplexed wife. Why the hell did you bring her? She'll only make things worse. What makes you say that? Wilma asked calmly. Corey has an unfinished medical degree, and if she had finished medical school, she would be an excellent therapist. That most important word is unfinished. Ingrid said it angrily. Ingrid, do you really think I'd hire Corey if she didn't have any knowledge at all? We had a chat during the ride, and then we visited Tio's doctor. He has instructed Corey, and he is convinced she is the right person for the job. I don't know, the wife threw in irritably. She is just an undergraduate doctor, and she's pregnant. Honestly, I was shocked by your decision. Darling, I know how careful you are about Tio, but trust me, everything will be fine, Wilma assured her. I don't think so, Ingrid thought, but said nothing. Corey gave the impression of a person who knows her job. Despite not being a qualified doctor, she quickly made the same diagnosis as the visiting doctor. Corey noticed that the child's living quarters were excessively damp. Most likely, his frequent illnesses are due to this, she suggested. Changing the room and belongings should improve the situation without the need to move to the camp. What a smartass, Ingrid thought angrily. She wanted nothing more than to avoid living under the same roof as some ragamuffin. However, Wilma stood his ground. His intuition told him Corey's presence would bring benefits, and he was right. Tio loved Corey, if not as his own mother, but as a good, kind relative for sure. But as they say, trust but verify. Wilma decided to reassure himself by installing a camera. First, he needed to confirm Corey's trustworthiness. Secondly, he could monitor his son's well-being during his business trips. While in the office, Wilma periodically reviewed the footage and was satisfied. Corey fulfilled her duties perfectly, and the child was not disappointed in her. The problem was only with Ingrid. Wilma was no fool and suspected that his wife was unhappy with the young nurse's presence. Ingrid tried to convince him of the nurse's lack of professionalism, and the man felt that something else was behind her attitude. Maybe Ingrid is just jealous, Wilma thought. When he first saw Corey, he didn't pay much attention to her appearance. However, when she had tidied herself up and wore new clothes bought with his advance payment, Wilma noticed that she was quite attractive. Corey had long, light blonde hair, slightly slanted, bright blue eyes, soft pink puffy lips, and a natural blush. Ingrid was beautiful as well, of course, but her beauty was the result of the work of a stylist, makeup artist, and hairdresser. People like Ingrid are usually considered stunning, but not beautiful. Perhaps that was the issue. I should bring Ingrid a more expensive gift for my business trip, Wilma thought. She loves that, and then we can travel somewhere to relax. I have to go on a business trip tomorrow, Wilma announced during dinner. It will be for a couple of weeks. Can you manage without me? Sure, honey, Ingrid nodded. You can be sure that there won't be any unpleasant surprises from my side. With that, she cast an unkind glance at Corey. Wilma sighed quietly. Here we go again. As he continued to observe his son and the nurse, the man became more convinced that this girl was a godsend. Corey spent almost the entire day with Tio, showing genuine interest in his well-being. She regularly measured his body temperature and administered the prescribed medication. In short, she performed her duties to the best of her ability, and as for qualifications, she will definitely get her degree in her time. But now Wilma could only hope that Ingrid would change her attitude towards Corey with time. "What unpleasant surprises are you talking about?" Wilma smiled. "The main thing is that you get along." "Dad, Corey and I have already got along well," smiled Tio. "Well, that's great," his father concluded. Ingrid continued to eat dinner with a sour expression. It wasn't that she was jealous of the nurse taking care of her stepson, but she feared that this obscure newcomer with supposed medical education might threaten her position. Ingrid saw only one way to get rid of the despised nurse: to frame her. But how? That was the question. "Never mind," the young woman thought optimistically. "There will be a way, eventually. By the way," Ingrid said to Corey as soon as her husband had left for his business trip, "from now on you will eat in the kitchen." "Okay," the nurse shrugged, but the boy resisted. "No, Corey will eat with us." "Tio, while your daddy is away, it will be as I say," retorted the stepmother. "No," the boy frowned. "You little brat." Ingrid wanted to scold her stepson, but hesitated upon remembering the camera. It was one thing to put the staff in their place, and quite another to yell at the child. Wilma never forgave anyone for that. "Tio," she said in a sugary voice, "it's necessary. Corey will eat in the kitchen. After all, the gardener and the guard eat in the kitchen, and there's nothing wrong." "No," the child said, standing his ground. "And you are bad." "Tio, there is no need to argue," said the nurse, sitting down on the jacket. "I'll eat in the kitchen, and then as usual I'll come to you. It's really no big deal." "All right," the boy nodded after a little thought. After breakfast, Corey took Tio out for a walk. Meanwhile, Ingrid tried to solve the issue with that suddenly appearing nurse. "Think, Ingrid, think," she said mentally to herself. "There must be some way of evicting this beggar from here." She went up to her stepson's room, intending once more to air his room, and just then her gaze fell on the camera. Of course, how could I not have thought of that? Cunning Ingrid's plan was a piece of cake. She purposely placed her purse in the boy's room so that it could be visible on the camera. Ingrid was sure that Corey would take the purse and return it to her, and then she would be able to convince her husband that his protege was an ordinary thief. The plan was right. Corey noticed the purse and, assuming it belonged to Ingrid, decided to return it. "Is this yours, Ingrid?" she said, holding out her find. "To you, I'm Mrs. Castro," the woman said arrogantly. "Mrs. Castro, is this your purse?" With faint irony, the nurse repeated her question. "Mine," Ingrid nodded. Unopening it, she exclaimed, "It's empty." "Where is my money?" "Well, I don't know that." Corey said it resolutely, guessing what the arrogant woman was hinting at. "I found this purse in Tio's room and brought it to you at once. Whether it was empty or had something in it, I didn't look. But I did, and there were $1,000 in credit cards in there." "Oh, you've cleaned it out." "Well, yeah, I'm such a fool to take the money and return your empty purse," Corey remarked with a chuckle. After all, she was human and would not allow anyone to humiliate her or even accuse her of something she didn't do. "How should I know what's in your head?" grumbled Ingrid, adding, "I think you went somewhere away from the camera, took everything out, and then you pretended you weren't involved. Get out of here. Thieves don't belong in a decent home, and with the money you've stolen, you can count it as your severance pay." "But I didn't take any money," retorted Corey, and her voice trembled. "I don't want to listen to your lie," Ingrid said with her brow raised. "But if you don't get out of here within 15 minutes, you'll have to explain everything in the police station. Believe me, it'll be more difficult for you." "Who do you think they'll believe? Me, the wife of a decent businessman, or some beggar half-doctor?" Corey realized that it was useless to argue and went to her room to pack her things. Ingrid followed her and watched Corey packing triumphantly. Everything had gone according to her brilliantly simple plan. The nurse, swallowing her tears, left the room and left the house. She was glad that Tio hadn't seen her leaving, but the rest of her life was bad. The little money she had in her wallet was enough only for a couple of nights in the cheapest hostel, and Corey was again faced with the problem of what to do. When Wilma heard from Ingrid about Corey's crime, he was discouraged to say the least. He didn't want to believe it, and he couldn't. He had helped the poor woman as a human being, and she had repaid him. That was beyond his understanding of and faith in people. After watching the tape, he was convinced that his son's nurse had taken Ingrid's wallet from the table. But did Corey take money from it? That was the question. On the other hand, Wilma had no reason not to trust his wife. Yes, Ingrid disliked the nurse from first sight, but baseless accusations would be too much, even for the disgruntled Ingrid. Besides, Ingrid loved Tio, wished him well, and couldn't help but notice that Corey's presence at their house was good for him. Yes, the camera couldn't confirm the exact fact of the theft, but the fact that Corey had the purse in her hands was pure truth. You know, when a person is tight on money, they may go for a lot more than that, Ingrid said. How do you know what kind of trouble she's really in? Maybe she owed someone money. What do you know about her besides what she told you? Nothing. Wilma knew that his wife definitely had a point. No matter how much you feed the wolf, he's still looking in the woods. So it is sadly true to admit, most likely, Corey did steal the money. After the conversation with her husband, Ingrid drank white wine with exotic fruits and gloated. She'd gotten what she wanted. You've lived in a decent house and slept on clean sheets. It's time to return to your usual good-for-nothing life, Ingrid thought viciously. Where's Corey? Tio asked when his stepmother entered his room in the evening. Corey doesn't work for us anymore. Ingrid shrugged and opened the window. Why? The child asked plaintively. Because your darling Corey has stolen my money, said the stepmother eagerly. You're lying. Corey's good. You're bad. If you don't want to believe it, I don't care, Ingrid said, grinning. Close the window, please, Tio asked. I'm cold. All right, replied the stepmother after a little hesitation, and she closed the window. The next day, the boy felt sick again. I feel bad, Tio complained. Well, what's the matter with you again? Ingrid rolled her eyes. The boy was all red and his eyes shone with an unhealthy glow. Give me the syrup, Tio asked quietly. What kind of syrup? You don't even know what kind of syrup, exclaimed the boy in despair. Why did you kick Corey out? I've already explained to you that she's a thief, Ingrid said, and then, looking sternly at the boy, added, Not another word about her, do you understand? Tio was smart beyond his years and guessed that he would not get what he wanted. It's better to wait for Daddy. The stepmother gave the syrup and left the room. She wanted to open the window, but the boy said that he was very cold, and Ingrid did not do it. Tio began to wither, and it wasn't just the illness. The boy felt that only Corey really cared for him. Daddy, of course, also loved him very much, but he worked a lot and could not spend enough time with him. Ingrid didn't care about him. All she cared about was her own person and Wilma's money. As for Corey, after such a dishonorable discharge, she had fallen on hard times. After spending 2 nights in a hostel, she went in search of some kind of accommodation. She hoped that the world wouldn't be left without kind people. What if someone will take me in for a loan, Corey thought hopefully, or offer to help them with household chores in exchange for a roof over my head. However, Corey's hopes were fading by the minute. There was no one willing to lend her a corner. Still, Corey tried not to despair. What else could she do? She decided to visit the neighborhood where she and Steve had rented an apartment. People often rented out apartments there for very low prices because no one wanted to live there since it was a very criminal district. And miraculously, she got lucky. However, it was hardly to be called real luck. The man who agreed to lend Corey the tiny apartment lived in the next one, and he was a heavy drunkard. The apartment was filthy and smelled of stale cigarette smoke. But of course, it was better than living on the street. I expect money in a month, said the drunk landlord. Deal, nodded Corey, heartily hoping to find some work. The main thing was not to inform the potential employer about her pregnancy. During her job search, her landlord would visit her home from time to time and ask about money. But it hasn't been a month yet, has it? Corey invariably answered, suspecting that the man needed money for the booze, and the sooner the better. Finally, Corey managed to get a job at a food delivery service. We pay weekly, the administrator informed her, and Corey nodded happily. She couldn't have dreamed of such luck. The pay was good, and by her calculations, she should pay the rent on time. After working for a week, Corey filled the fridge and put aside money for the rent. But unfortunately, that was the end of her bright streak. One day she got sick at work. Corey was leaving the shopping center, loaded with products that she was to deliver, and fainted. The frightened administrator called an ambulance. "Well, in your condition, it's not normal to carry such heavy weights," said the doctor. "You're at risk of miscarriage, so you'll have to stay here for a couple of days." Corey sighed heavily. She had only worked 2 days this week and wondered if she would be paid for her work. No work again, no money. Corey thought sadly, and how will I pay the rent? The only positive thing was that the hospital was much more comfortable than the shabby apartment. She called the landlord and asked him to wait an extra week, mentioning she had gotten to the hospital. Of course, he was already being overly kind to her, but she was hoping for his extra favor. However, this time the man didn't want to get into the poor woman's problems. "I don't care. Do you have any money at all?" He interrupted Corey's stream of complaints. "Yes, in the kitchen cupboard, under the blue teapot," she replied, hoping that the landlord would be convinced of her solvency and make concessions. What a naive girl she was. "That's good," the man said, visibly pleased, and added, "I take all the money. That's 1 month's pay and my moral compensation for the long wait. And you should not come back here again. I don't need such irresponsible tenants here. Where can I get the key?" "At the city hospital," Corey answered gloomily. "I'll leave it with the lady on duty." "Why aren't you eating?" Ingrid asked, watching her stepson pick at a plate of pasta with a frown. "I don't want to," Tio mumbled, defiantly pushing the plate away. The boy longed for Corey very much, but realized that he shouldn't talk about her with his stepmother. Otherwise, she would start cursing and calling her a thief again. "How are you?" Wilma cheerfully asked the household upon returning from a business trip. "Fine," purred Ingrid, kissing her husband. "Yeah," he smiled. "That's great. Where's Tio?" "He's in his room," she replied. Seeing his son, Wilma froze with his mouth open. To be honest, he didn't even immediately recognize Tio. The boy had turned pale, shriveled up, and looked unfortunate. "Are you sick again?" the worried father asked. "Dad, can Corey come back?" replied the boy, a tear rolling down his pale cheek. Wilma was confused. "Sonny, I would love for her to come back, but it's impossible," he replied in despair. Wilma looked at his wife as if asking her if Tio knew about the theft. Ingrid barely nodded. "Daddy, I know that Ingrid thinks Corey stole the money," said the shrewd child. "But that's not true. She's good and Ingrid is bad. I was cold and she opened the window." "What are you talking about? A good or bad?" Ingrid couldn't take it anymore. If only it were that simple. "Ingrid, don't yell at the child," Wilma said quietly but firmly. "I'm sorry," she stammered, "but you should understand." "I understand," said the husband. "When I left, Tio got sick again. Isn't that a reason to listen to his request?" Ingrid couldn't believe her ears. "Are you going to hire her again?" the wife marveled. "If it would really help, yes. And then I'd still like to hear the other side of this case." Without delay, Wilma began his search for Corey. It didn't seem easy, as she had no permanent address. All he had was the address of the apartment she shared with the father of her child, but they had broken up, and it was unlikely she would go back to him after such a betrayal. Though she might have acquaintances there, it's worth a try, Wilma reasoned. There are no other clues yet. The neighborhood looked shabby, and the successful businessman looked like a man from another world on its streets. Wilma showed Corey's picture to the locals, but people just shrugged their shoulders. He was about to leave the place empty-handed when luck smiled on him. "Yes, I saw this girl yesterday," nodded a woman of about 40 in a flowered dress and a washed-out sweater. "She rented an apartment in that house over there on the first floor." "Thank you very much," he thanked the woman, and he went to the building she had indicated. Wilma came to the entrance, and seeing 3 drunken men, he asked, "Guys, have any of you rented an apartment out to a woman named Corey?" "Well, let's say it's me," one of them replied and smiled, showing the remaining 4 teeth. "Let's say, or is it really you?" "Yes, she was my tenant," the man replied, looking at Wilma with interest. "He's clearly hoping to get some money from me," the businessman guessed. "Well, whatever you ask, as long as the information is useful." And the information was indeed important. For $50, Wilma found out that Corey had rented an apartment from that drunkard, but he had asked her to vacate the premises due to lack of payment. And where could she be now, do you know? Asked Wilma, not hoping for an answer. The day before yesterday, she was in the city hospital. She called and tried to get me to wait another week. I said no. I'm not a charity organization. I see. Wilma nodded again and, taking money out of his wallet, walked away. What kind of jerk would you have to be to kick a pregnant woman out of an apartment? Wilma thought with indignation. Although, what else could I expect from a marginal? However, he was more interested in another point. If Corey, as Ingrid assured him, had stolen the money, then how come she had nothing to pay for this shanty place? The answer was self-evident. Corey hadn't stolen anything, and Ingrid hadn't paid her a penny. Wilma was terribly embarrassed. Corey had worked for him for almost a whole month. She'd done her job perfectly, and Tio not only recovered but also became attached to her. I just have to find her, thought Wilma, and he went to the city hospital praying that Corey was there. Threatened miscarriage. Corey smiled sadly, and the businessman's heart snapped from nervousness. 1-to-1, and I ended up getting sick right at work. That's how I ended up here. Wilma mentally grabbed his head. It wasn't what he wanted for the woman who worked for him, if they did it well. At work, he raised his eyebrows in bewilderment. Yeah, she nodded. I started looking for a new one after Ingrid had kicked me out, and I got a job at a delivery service. Corey, this very dismissal is what I want to talk to you about, Wilma began. It's a very delicate issue, and Wilma stopped talking, not knowing what to say next. Corey came to his rescue. Mr. Castro, I didn't take your wife's purse. Well, I did, but I didn't look inside. I just wanted to give it to her. There was desperation in Corey's voice, and the businessman believed it was true. I believe you, he said quietly, and I want to suggest that we go back. Agreed? But your wife won't let me work, Corey said uncertainly. I'll take care of my wife. Good, then I agree, Corey nodded. Well, now rest and take care of yourself, he smiled. We're looking forward to seeing you. The doctors made great efforts, and Corey's pregnancy was saved. Wilma and Tio came to her discharge together. I'm very glad you're coming back, said little Tio, looking at her seriously. Seeing Corey, Ingrid pressed her lips together unhappily but said nothing. She did not know what she should do. Oh, these peckers. They are really tenacious creatures, thought Ingrid grudgingly. You close the door, they come in through the window. There was nothing to think of setting Corey up again. Wilma wouldn't believe it anyway. Tio began to recover quickly, his cheeks rounded and rosy. He loved to go for walks with his nanny. They went to the zoo, amusement park, and other hot spots for the youngest visitors. And once Tio and Corey went to the park, they found a puppy there, took him in, and named him Finn. Wilma was happy, but something was still bothering him. But what was it? Corey, you are simply a magician, he said one day. Tio seems to have recovered, gotten stronger, and he is really happier now than before. What are you doing with him? Miracles, that's what. Oh no, no miracles, the girl replied, embarrassed. Tio was moved to another room. That was the first step. Optimal air temperature plus carefully selected medications. That's all the miracles. At the mention of temperature, Wilma suddenly remembered his son's words about Ingrid. I was cold, and she opened the window. Probably that's what caused his constant illness, Wilma thought. Wilma had often puzzled over why his child's room was damp. His first thought was that perhaps the builders had made a mistake somewhere, resulting in increased humidity and, as a result, frequent colds. Wilma even thought about filing a lawsuit against the construction company. Then suddenly a terrible thought settled in his mind. What if Ingrid was intentionally cooling down Tio's room? She also insisted that I send him to a health camp. But why? Wilma realized that he couldn't easily accuse his wife of such a thing, so he decided to order an independent examination. In his heart, there was a hope that he was wrong and that he couldn't marry a woman capable of deliberately harming his son's health. It should be noted that the relationship between the spouses became strained. One day, Ingrid casually brought up the topic of whether it was inappropriate for the servants to eat at the same table as the hosts. The servants? Maybe, Wilma nodded calmly. But Corey has become a member of our family for Tio and me. She cured my son, for which I will be grateful to her for the rest of my life." Ingrid frowned, and then tears rolled out from her eyes. "Okay, I finally get it. Since you don't need me here anymore, it's time for us to end this charade. Wilma, I'm filing for divorce. I can't be married to a man who doesn't love me at all." With these words, she got up and ran upstairs to her bedroom. Of course, Ingrid had no intention of getting a divorce. It was just a manipulation. And Ingrid hoped that Wilma would chase after her and beg for forgiveness. And then her only condition would be to fire Corey. However, Ingrid turned out to be a poor manipulator. Wilma willingly signed the divorce agreement and, moreover, said that he intended to give Ingrid everything she was entitled to, which was nothing. Being a foresighted man, Wilma grew up with a prenuptial agreement, and as a result, the greedy lady was left with nothing. "Be grateful that I didn't accuse you of taking all the money from the safe." Wilma said this after the divorce process, "and you thought I wouldn't notice anything." Ingrid gave her ex-husband a hateful look, but it didn't make any impression on him. "Well, my dear, note that it wasn't me who filed for divorce." Wilma grinned, and here, as a memento, the former husband handed her the results of an independent examination. "Goodbye. I wish you happiness in your search for another fool." "To hell with you," said Ingrid angrily as she walked away, her heels clacking loudly. "How could I have failed so stupidly? Well, I'll make life fun for you. You forget worldly wisdom. He laughs best when he laughs last." That same evening, armed with a can of gasoline and a lighter, Ingrid went to the house where she had been living. Corey and Tio were playing board games while Finn was happily wandering around. Wilma was due back any minute. "It smells burnt," the boy remarked. Corey sniffed and also noticed a burning smell, and the next second she was horrified to see flames through the window. "Corey, I'm scared," cried Tio. "Calm down, my darling. Stay calm," she said soothingly, picking up the boy and running towards the exit. They couldn't waste any time, as the fire would soon block their way to safety. Corey placed Tio on the grass, stood away from the fire, and took a moment to catch her breath. "I've already called the fire department," the neighbor said, running up to them. "There's Finn," Tio squealed. Corey couldn't leave the poor pet to die. Without hesitation, she rushed back into the blazing heat. A few minutes later, a deafening explosion was heard, and the house collapsed like a house of cards. Driving along his street, Wilma Castro couldn't believe his eyes. The house that he had poured his heart and soul into was engulfed in flames. The man sped up his car. "Where's my son?" he shouted, jumping out of the car. "The boy is at the neighbor's," one of the firefighters said. And Wilma rushed towards the neighbor's house, hoping that Corey and the dog were safe too. Corey, the little one, stammered, overwhelmed with shock. And Finn, they took her to the hospital, and she's seriously hurt. Wilma rushed to the hospital and found out that Corey was in stable condition. Her hands and feet were slightly burned, but in general, her life and pregnancy were not in danger. As luck would have it, a second before the house collapsed, Corey had left the house through the emergency exit in the kitchen. Wilma sat by Corey's bedside, who was sleeping under sedation, and holding her hand, looked at her with a worried look. Only now he realized how attached he had become to this girl. "I never had time to tell you that I love you," Wilma whispered and gently squeezed Corey's palm. The house was destroyed by the fire and couldn't be rebuilt. Fortunately, it was insured. Security cameras captured her setting the fire. They couldn't put her in jail because Ingrid was declared insane and placed in a psychiatric hospital. Corey was getting better every day. One day, Wilma came to visit her with Tio. "Why did you risk your life like that?" the man asked. "But it's your son's favorite puppy, and we found him in the park and tamed him. And as you know, we are responsible for those we have tamed," replied Corey with a smile. "Then you're responsible for me, Corey. After this accident, I have realized that you have become very dear to me, and I will not let you go anywhere else. If you let me, of course," whispered the man in love, taking her hands in his. Corey underwent a rehabilitation course. The lovers got married, and on New Year's Eve, she suddenly felt that happy motherhood was only hours away. And soon, a little baby girl was born. This new year became the best in the life of Wilma Castro. After all, his family became truly happy and bigger, and it was worth living for.